Good afternoon. I am Tomas Saenz, President and General Counsel of MALDEF. On behalf of MALDEF, I'd like to welcome everyone here in our studio audience in the nation's capital and across America watching live to MALDEF's 2012 Latino State of the Union. From redistricting in Texas to proposals regarding the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that would detrimentally affect Latino students, Latino policy priorities have increasingly emerged as central to American political discourse in recent years. We come together this afternoon to explore the intricacies of policies that affect Latinos and to think together about how we can develop and advocate for policies that better serve the nation by improving conditions for all Latinos living in the United States. We thank you all for participating in this critical discussion. It will take the effort of everyone in this room and everyone watching across America on the webcast and beyond if we are to see real change and positive impact for Latinos. I am now honored to introduce our very special guest this afternoon. Secretary Hilda L. Solis was confirmed as Secretary of Labor on February 24, 2009. Before that, she was a congresswoman for 8 years representing California's 32nd Congressional District. In Congress, Solis's priorities included expanding access to affordable health care, protecting the environment, and improving the lives of working families. A recognized leader on clean energy jobs, she authored the Green Jobs Act, which provided funding for green-collar job training for veterans, displaced workers, at-risk youth, and individuals in families under 200% of the poverty line. Solis also served on the Helsinki Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, as well as the Mexico-United States Interparliamentary Group. A nationally recognized leader on the environment, Solis is the first woman to receive the John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award for her pioneering work on environmental justice issues. Her California environmental justice legislation, enacted in 1999, was the first of its kind in the nation to become law. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to the United States Secretary of Labor, Hilda L. Solis.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you. Hola. Buenas tardes. Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for that very kind introduction. And thanks to everyone at MALDEF, watching here and online, for your work every day to help America, which helps to fulfill its promise to hardworking Latinos. I want to speak for a few minutes today about President Obama's vision for the advancement of Latinos in our society. Last month, in his State of the Union address, the President laid out his vision for an America built to last. In that vision, the President sees a central role for Latinos in our economic recovery. As a proud Latina, I'm inspired, I'm empowered by that vision. Already, we've come so far. In the last 23 months, American businesses have added more than 3.7 million private sector jobs. Last year, we created the most jobs since 2005. And when I think back on the last 3 years, I'm so proud for the work the President and all of us have been able to accomplish. But the President and I also recognize that Latinos in this country are still hurting from the effects of the recession. Many are still struggling to carry their families through these challenging times. We still have so much to do. So I want to talk a bit about our agenda to make the State of the Union even stronger for Latinos across America. First, an America built to last is a nation where the highest levels of teaching and learning are realized. We must ensure that our best teachers are encouraged, rewarded, and supported in their work. Without them, we can't meet the challenges of a complex 21st century economy. We are acting to give Latino youth a direct and meaningful pathway to higher education. 1 in 4 American-born Latinos drops out of high school. 1 in 2 Latinos born outside of the United States doesn't finish high school. President Obama believes that that needs to change. He has also called on Congress to double down on the number of work-study jobs available, extend tuition tax breaks, and prevent student loan interest rates from doubling. But we must reach even further to make sure Latinos are prepared today for the jobs of tomorrow. So second, an America built to last is one that embraces the role of Latinos in the industries of the future. The President is promoting our advancement in high-growth industries, which include IT, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, and renewable energy. We must work together to give Latinos the skills they need to compete in these high-growth jobs. The President wants to link community colleges to businesses. His plan will invest $8 billion to train 2 million workers with the new skills they need to access these good-paying careers. But the President and I believe that we can't turn our backs on our unemployed, as they also need to acquire new skills. We fought hard for temporary extension of unemployment benefits last December, and we continue to make the case to extend these benefits because we know nearly 1 million Latinos will lose this critical lifeline if Congress fails to act. That would mean fewer dollars flowing to local grocers, gas stations, retailers, and other small businesses. It would mean small business owners will have a harder time making their current payroll, and it would mean slower economic growth and a slower recovery. We can't afford to fall backward. Progress is made by marching forward. There are still millions of Americans looking for work, and there are still 4 unemployed people per every job opening. They are our everyday heroes of our economic recovery. Now is not the time to turn our backs on the unemployed. And third, an America built to last is one in which Latino workers are treated with dignity and respect. I've made worker protection one of my top priorities as Secretary of Labor. I signed a memorandum of understanding with the Mexican Embassy to protect the labor rights of migrant workers here in the United States, but we've also formed partnerships with the embassies of Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. And we know many of our Latino brothers and sisters work in low-paying and difficult sectors like construction, agriculture, and the service industry. Many migrant workers are afraid to report mistreatment because it can lead to more abuse or the loss of their jobs. That's why we're partnering with the institutions where they're most likely to go for help, their own country's consulates. We're getting workers the education and information and training they need to protect themselves. And we're training employers who utilize migrant workers so they understand their legal obligations. Part of this effort is fighting worker misclassification. When companies classify workers as independent contractors to get around our wage laws, they are depressing wages for all workers. And this is simply illegal, and we're committed to stopping it. My department is working closely with the IRS to share information to make sure workers are paid what they're legally owed. Also, we're working in states like Alabama that just passed an anti-immigrant law to ensure that individuals are aware of their rights, because no state law can override a worker's right to be paid the federal minimum wage. Under my tenure, my department has added more than 300 new wage and hour division field investigators. We now have more than 1,000 staff members dedicated to enforcing wage and hour laws, and the majority of them are bilingual. We're committed to ensuring that Latino workers are safe on the job and fully and fairly compensated for their hard work. Finally, an America built to last is one that includes all of our people. In the State of the Union, the President again called on Congress to fix our broken immigration system once and for all. We all know this has been a difficult uphill battle, but I'm not giving up, and neither is President Obama. As he said in his State of the Union address, the opponents of action are out of excuses. It's frustratingly clear that election year politics may prevent a breakthrough on immigration reform in this year. So, in his State of the Union address, the President said that the least Congress can do is stop expelling young Latinos who want to staff our labs, defend our country, and grow our economy. We know that tens of thousands of highly qualified, well-educated young people would enlist in the military or go to college if the DREAM Act becomes law. Back in my hometown, a study by UCLA concluded that DREAM Act participants could contribute up to $3.5 trillion to the U.S. economy during their lives. The DREAM Act is the right thing to do for our economic security and our national security. And the President and I are going to keep pushing. The American people are with us on this issue, and we're also thankful to have the many advocates like you making the case as well. It's clear to me that the President's vision is a call to action on behalf of Latinos everywhere. And it's also clear to me that all of our strength, endurance, and courage as a community will be needed to achieve this vision. because what's at stake here is the very survival of that basic American promise. The promise that if you work hard, you can get ahead and secure a better future for you and your family. My parents, like so many of yours, acted on that promise. It's because of their hard work that their daughter became the nation's first Latina Secretary of Labor. Now we have an obligation not only to keep that American promise alive, but to pass it on to our children and our grandchildren. This is indeed a make or break moment for the Latino community. Latinos in the middle class and all those trying to get into the middle class need our help more than ever. So I hope you will join me in helping President Obama meet this moment for Latino families. Thank you all for participating in this conversation today and for all that you do. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, MALDEF.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We know you have a very busy schedule, and we are honored that you could join us today to help us think critically about changing the life of Latinos in this nation. I am Tom Reston. I am chairman of the board at MALDEF, and I am joined here this afternoon by my colleague on the board of directors at MALDEF, Miki Ibarra. And it is my pleasure once again to add my welcome to you to participate in this critical discussion about the public policies that affect Latinos. MALDEF is a truly extraordinary organization full of extraordinary people who have made the protection of Latino civil rights their top priority. MALDEF staff have an unrelenting commitment to service, and their awesome successes over the years are proof of the hard work each staff member puts into every case. Let's take a look at the significant gains that MALDEF achieved for the Latino community in recent months.
In 2011, our team of legislative attorneys nationwide, from the nation's capital in D.C. through the state capitals in Austin, Springfield, and Sacramento, have been incredibly busy in trying to turn back so many of the anti-immigrant proposals that have targeted our community. I think that effort has, by and large, been successful.
As we all know, the anti-immigrant rhetoric hits across the board and has had such tremendous impact. But the work that MALDEF has done and the work that Tom has done in showing that this Constitution is to work for every single one of us has been so very effective.
Regrettably, following Arizona's enactment last year of SB 1070, 5 other states in 2011 followed suit. Arizona and these 5 other states, which I've labeled the dirty half dozen, have retrogressed, have gone backward for our nation in challenging long-standing constitutional precedents and principles by enacting laws that they clearly have no authority to enact or enforce. And so MALDEF has taken on a leadership role in challenging these laws and ones like them at the local level. I think the most extreme manifestation of this trend by too many unscrupulous leaders to target the Latino community through its most vulnerable members, the undocumented immigrant population, has been an attempt to change our Constitution in various ways to take away the right of those born here to citizenship. I think it's critically important that as a nation we resoundingly reject these efforts, and an important step toward that end was taken by the American Bar Association, which adopted unanimously through its House of Delegates a resolution that MALDEF put forward together with others that would reaffirm the legal profession's belief in long-standing interpretation and application of the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment.
I personally and my community has benefited by the work that MALDEF has done in redistricting and reapportionment, and it's continuing to do so. The Latino community would have no representation, or at least the extent of the level of representation that it has in Congress today, in state legislatures as well as local government, had MALDEF not had a presence in the issue of reapportionment and redistricting.
And MALDEF has been involved in a nationwide campaign to inform and educate community members about how to be involved in their state and local redistricting process, how to provide input about communities of interest that ought to be kept intact, how to provide important input about the obligations under the Federal Voting Rights Act. Redistricting is a critical step to greater involvement and greater input in governance. But for that to occur, those who are drawing the maps have to ensure that districts are created that permit the Latino community, through its voters, to express its choice and have that choice result in election and representation.
But we still have much work to do. And I think that MALDEF, with the role that it's taken on, the aggressiveness that they've on, the kind of lawyers that they have at the table, are ready to go out and fight many of those battles.
So I'm proud of the efforts of our policy staff, of our legislative attorneys nationwide, from D.C. to all of the state capitals, in working to ensure that we have laws that better protect the civil rights of Latinos and better serve our national interests in inclusion and incorporation of all communities in our future progress. But we also recognize that the opportunities to push back on those who would seek to restrict the rights of Latinos, who would seek to restrict the application of our longstanding constitutional principles and values, those opportunities, coupled with the challenges of a growing demand for our services, is something that the dedicated staff of MALDEF is looking forward to pursuing with great vigor throughout this decade.
Our community benefits by MALDEF's work. Tough work to do, but it needs to be done, and there's only one organization that can get it done, and that's MALDEF.
I too want to thank Secretary Solis for being with us today and launching our conversation, a critical conversation. I'd also like to thank the MALDEF staff led by David Damian Figueroa, who are responsible for organizing today's critical discussion. Indeed, I want to thank all of MALDEF staff for the work that you've seen depicted in the video, for the work that goes on a daily basis to secure the rights of all Latinos living in the United States. Finally, I'd again like to thank all of you, both those present here and those watching on the web, for joining in this critical and ongoing conversation about Latino policy priorities and how their pursuit can lead to a better nation for all of us. Let me begin with some initial thoughts. Each year brings greater focus to the challenges that we Latinos face as the now officially acknowledged largest minority group in the nation. Even as early as February in this presidential election year, through debates and political discourse in all media, we have gotten a taste, a conceitedly bitter taste, of some of what is in store between today and November. In the Latino community, our challenge has embedded within it a great contradiction. In the Latino community and among our many allies and friends, we know, we see, and we welcome the increased role of Latinos in the future of this nation, the increased role in policy making, the increased role in the economy, the increased role in culture, the increased role in every element of society. But to many, that increased role in the future for the Latino community sparks fear. And there are too many unscrupulous political leaders who seek to foment and exploit that fear of demographic change, that fear of the increasing role for the Latino community. Our history tells us that the Know-Nothings, the name applied to the 19th century nativist political party, will appear at various points in our history to respond, to channel in very negative ways, and demagogue, a fear in the populace of new and growing communities. So our challenge is how to respond to this latest manifestation of know-nothingism. We must surely reassure the general populace that they have nothing to fear. We must alleviate their fears of demographic change, of the growth of the Latino community, and immunize them from the many unscrupulous leaders, some of them under the veil of academic opinion, others under the banner of populism, who seek to purvey, implicitly or explicitly, fantastical visions of the dramatically changed United States, never for the better in their view, when the Latino community takes its increased role throughout society. So we must first alleviate fear of change. But at the same time as we alleviate that fear of change epitomized by the growth of our community, we must resist the impulse to become resistors of change, to somehow cement the extant social condition. We must instead, while alleviating fear of change, embrace and continue to pursue our long-standing role as promoters of change in policy, promoters of change for the nation. We must be change promoters because too many unwise policies have been adopted and will be adopted, even by our friends, in part in response or reaction to that fear of change, or the perceived fear of change in the general populace. The last few years have given us example after example of the kinds of change we must seek in response to those who would react to fear or respond to perceived fear by keeping in place policies that disserve not just the Latino community, but the entire nation. Over the course of the last year, in our work on redistricting, we have seen time and time again a resistance to change, a fear of change, that manifests as a devotion to enacting so-called status quo maps for districts at local, state, and federal level. These status quo maps, with minimal changes from what has pertained over the last 10 years, have the predictable and clear result of preventing growing communities like the Latino community from taking on greater leadership through election to policy-making office. So we must be resistors. We must be change promoters against those who, reacting to fear of change, advocate status quo maps. In the area of immigration, we must be promoters of change from a long-standing embedded federal policy that results in multiple lines for those who seek to immigrate legally to this country. Multiple lines defined by national origin, with the inevitable result that over many, many years, some folks, particularly those from Mexico who seek to reunite with their families, must wait decades and longer to obtain legal permission to come to this country. We must be promoters of change in the face of that long-standing policy. We must be promoters of change in the face of those who, embodying an enforcement mentality, seek to meet a preset number of removals from this country, with, again, the inevitable result that they have to use programs like secure communities that result in splitting families and deporting and removing folks who are peaceful contributors to our economy and our society. In the area of education, we have to be promoters of change as we respond to those who, in the name of local control, resist a strengthening of the federal role in ensuring accountability for reducing and ultimately eliminating the education gap. Whatever the merits of local control once was in the history of this country, we must be promoters of change because we know that local control, and specifically leaving to localities the role of ensuring accountability, of ensuring progress in eliminating the education gap, has very little appeal when so many parents, particularly in our Latino community, of school children lack the right to vote, and so many parents in the Latino community and other communities cannot significantly influence the outcome of votes because those elections are so often influenced by heavy funders of campaigns. We must be promoters of change in the face of those who, in the name of local control and preserving local control, manifest their fear of change. We must be promoters of change in response to those who, reacting to fear of change, have done what has happened recurrently throughout our history, respond to a recession by scapegoating with no factual evidence whatsoever hard-working peoples who, like so many before them, have come to this country with the dream of working hard and providing a better future for their families. We must be promoters of change in response to those who would respond to our ongoing recession in that way. The important thing is that despite the apparent contradiction between having to alleviate fear of change and simultaneously promote change, is that the change that we promote in the Latino community through the policies that we favor, like so many changes in history, do not so much depart from our historical roots, but bring us closer to our long-standing national and constitutional values and vision of this country. In this sense, we promote change that should actually create greater comfort and security in the general populace, so many of those whose fears are exploited, but should create greater comfort and security in the populace in our national future. This challenge, promoting change while alleviating fear of change, among others, is one that I know our Latino community is prepared and able and hardworking and ready to meet. This challenge to reassure while we promote a better America is one that together, all of us in this room and throughout the country, can champion with our allies to ensure that this national challenge, where Latinos must take the lead, of alleviating fear of change while promoting wise change, is one that we will succeed in meeting. Thank you. With that, we're now ready to begin a discussion in greater detail about critical policy concerns. And I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce our distinguished panel this afternoon. Juan Cartagena is President and General Counsel of LatinoJustice PRLDEF. LatinoJustice PRLDEF's mission is to champion an equitable society. Using the power of the law together with education and advocacy, LatinoJustice PRLDEF protects opportunities for all Latinos to succeed in work and school, fulfill their dreams, and sustain their families and communities. Next, I'd like to introduce Jessica Gonzalez-Rojas, Executive Director of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. Her organization's mission is to ensure the fundamental human right to reproductive health and justice for Latinas, their families, and their communities through public education, community mobilization, and policy advocacy. And please help me welcome Mercedes Marquez. Ms. Marquez is the Assistant Secretary for Community and Planning Development at HUD. She is responsible for more than $7 billion in assistance to America's communities, directing programs that are vital to the well-being of the nation's states and localities. And finally, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Roberto Suro, Director of the Tomas Rivera Policy Institute at the University of Southern California. The Tomas Rivera Policy Institute is a project of the University of Southern California School of Policy, Planning, and Development. And it is the successor to the think tank of the same name that for 25 years promoted informed policy making on issues affecting Latino communities. Welcome, panelists. The nation as a whole and the Latino community continue to suffer the great anxiety and very real family economic harms of an uncertain economy. This is a major concern for everyone. Roberto, how has the recession affected Latino families and the economic development of the Latino community in the United States?
Well, I mean, the effects have been quite broad and deep and varied. In different sectors of the Latino population have seen different kinds of impacts. Certainly, a very large segment of the population that during the first half of the 2000s and the last half of the 1990s had made big strides and had moved into the housing market at a particularly bad time, and often with particularly bad loan vehicles, has suffered hugely. The foreclosure rates among Latinos are really quite devastating in many states, certainly in California, where I've come from. And I think you have to be concerned that this is a substantial setback. I mean, in a kind of progress that people had really had high hopes for before the recession, and it's going to take some time for those people to recover financially from these losses. It's really not a blip in terms of those lives affected, their children's lives affected, the ability to send children to college, the ability to expand businesses, to do all the things that people can do when they're able to accumulate even a little bit of wealth. The other big impact that I would signal is that we've seen now an interruption in the flow of new immigrants into our communities. Certainly 5 years worth, going on to 6, since really as soon as the housing industry started to soften. We saw the numbers of new arrivals starting to decline in 2006. That's starting to add up. It's starting to add up into a substantial number of people who didn't come, and that's changing the mix of the population, I think, in ways that will have really long-term impacts.
Thanks. Mercedes, the recession and foreclosure crisis, as Roberto has explained, has hit Latino families hard with long-term implications. How have recent policy developments sought to address those concerns in the Latino community and in the rest of the nation?
I'd say that the statistic that is one that resonates with me all of the time, I never have it too far from me, is that between 2005 and 2009, Latinos lost 2/3 of their wealth because we keep it in our homes. We're that generation, we've worked so hard as a community nationally, and we'd finally broken through on real statistics to home ownership. And so it's the historic pace of our accumulation of wealth that has hit us so hard now. So what I'd say to you about the policies, some really important things. One, the president fought hard, and we've invested $7 billion in something called the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. It's focused directly in the neighborhoods around the country where foreclosures have been rampant, where there's a lot of vacancies. As it turns out, because in places like California and Florida and Arizona and others have been hit so hard, and that is also a place where Latinos live in predominant numbers, we have been hit harder there. As we invest these dollars, we're focusing in on these neighborhoods. So at least 16% of the dollars overall are focused in on Latino neighborhoods. I'd also say that as FHA has played a greater role in guaranteeing loans that are strong, healthy loans with good terms, now well over actually 16% of all FHA loans guaranteed are on behalf of Latino families, and that continues to grow. Finally, I'd say there's been a lot of talk in the last week about the historic settlement on robo-signing that was met with 5 national banks, $25 billion. Overwhelmingly, that money is going directly into the states that are most affected. So Florida and California, the first, second and first actually, largest in foreclosures, are going to get the large bulk of that money. That will help us go in, redistribute that wealth as we are able to go in for people that are underwater in their loans, give them capital reductions up to $10 billion focused just on that, and another $3 billion to help us actually restructure loans to take advantage of the historic low interest rates. So those are among some of the things that we're doing.
Great. So we've gotten a sense of the impact on families. Juan, what about urban Latino youth, young people? What are the pressing issues for young Latinos entering the workforce during this time of economic recession and associated anxiety?
The status of Latino youth, I would say, more immediately status of 16 to 25-year-olds is pretty clear in urban America. And I think it has a lot to do with both the economic recession that is affecting urban America in ways with depression-type numbers. In many ways, the studies that we have seen in places like New York and elsewhere has indicated that Latino youth are disconnected at very, very high rates. that is disconnected from the labor force entirely. That doesn't necessarily mean just unemployed, but also not even looking for work because there's no work to be had. And disconnected from the education system. And a number of reports that we have seen have indicated that Latino youth are now disconnected at very, very high rates across the board. This is creating major challenges for both the economy, our ability also to sustain Latino youth, our ability to get them back into the pipeline, as we know has a lot of holes in it, and trying to get them into college, and also has a lot to do in urban America, especially on issues that impact on criminal justice. But by and large, what we have seen is 16 to 24-year-old Latino youth those are critical points. And I say that because we can focus quite a bit on elementary school youth, and there are major problems there as well. But the staggering stats are the numbers. We're talking in a city like New York City, there are close to 325,000 Latino youth between the 16 and 24, and their disconnected rates could be as high as 20-25%. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who are literally not involved, not at all engaged. And that's the immediate concern. We can try to fix elementary school education with a number of inputs, including early childhood, Head Start programs. We could try to fix adequacy of education, quality of education, English language learners, but we have an immediate need, and that need is today.
Thank you. Now, Jessica, one hopeful note in these tough economic times relates to the Affordable Care Act and its promise of addressing the health care concerns of many uninsured Latino families. Jessica, are access to preventive care, and more specifically, access to reproductive health, still concerns the Latino community after the ACA's enactment?
Absolutely. The wins that we've achieved in health reform is really critical for the Latino community. Approximately 40% of Latinos are uninsured. And amongst women, it's really critical for us to access the reproductive health services that we need. We recently had a win under the Obama administration where he stood strong and ensured that contraceptive coverage will be included under the health reform bill without copay. Contraceptive coverage is widely popular and widely used amongst women in our country. 99% of women use contraception who are sexually active. 97% of Latinas use contraception that are sexually active. So it's really important to ensure that contraceptive access is maintained and that women are able to control the spacing and number of children in their families. So it's absolutely going to be an issue in this election. We're seeing the debate over and over again. We've done polling that supports the fact that Latinos support reproductive health services despite the feelings of the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church hierarchy. They agree that abortion should remain legal and agree that contraception is a really critical service in our community. So we're seeing the debate happen. We're glad the President is standing strong on supporting our access to reproductive health services, in particular contraceptives. So we appreciate his work in this area and know it's going to be a matter in the election.
Thank you. Now, one significant segment of the Latino community that's been harmed by the recession is the immigrant Latino community. Latino immigrants have also been the targets of demonizing political rhetoric and detrimental policy proposals across the country. First off, Roberto, you mentioned earlier that there have been effects of the recession on the flow of migration. How does that change the national Latino community in this country, and what does that mean for the future?
Well, in policy terms, I think there are two important lessons to take from the recession. One is the extent to which the flow of Latino migration, in particular, and the flow of undocumented migration is really very sensitive to demand in the labor market here. I think more than people had assumed, demand has driven the scale of movement of newcomers into the country. And that should lead to a realization of how that labor supply and our market are linked, and that and to understand that economic growth will probably bring a renewal of that migration, although perhaps in different forms, different kinds of people from different parts of Latin America going to different kinds of jobs. But still, there needs to, it should have brought home the lesson of how closely this is linked to our economic demands. The other really important lesson from the recession in these terms is that there was no return exodus. During this tremendous wave of economic losses, tremendous unemployment, and with all of the enforcement measures that you were talking about, the detention, the increased efforts by local police, the increased anti-immigrant rhetoric, we did not see any substantial return of people who were in the country out of status. They weathered the storm here. And that should be an indication of how durable this population is, how deeply seated it is in American society at this point. And if in policy terms you're thinking, well, one of the ways to reduce that population is to make life progressively more unpleasant for them through various measures, whatever they are. It's really, I think the bar has been set very high by the Great Recession because life was extremely uncomfortable. People have weathered years of unemployment and other difficulties and found reason to stay in the United States, found the resources in their communities, in their networks in order to get through that crisis. And that, too, I think, is something that is going to have to be taken into account as we look to formulating immigration policy in the future.
Jessica, as I mentioned, so much of the public debate plainly identifies immigration as a Latino issue. But it's an issue that touches many other overlapping communities. Your reproductive justice organization does work on immigration. Talk about why immigration is a women's issue and why it's important to be seen that way.
Mm-hmm. What our organization does is bring the immigration lens to the women's rights spaces. And we also bring the gender lens to the immigration spaces. And it's really critical to look at immigration policy through the lens of women. We see how policies like deporting millions of people could break up families and tear communities apart. And women are the foundation of their communities. They're the backbones of society. And when we look at immigration through that lens, we have to understand the needs of women and addressing the needs of families as well. We're seeing terrible rhetoric around the notion of anchor babies and that these immigrant women come to this country to have children and then suck the resources out of the society. And we know that's absolutely not true. And what that rhetoric has done is created a climate of fear in our community that they're fearful to use certain services that they're entitled to. For example, we're hearing reports from Arizona that ICE agents are trolling the labor and delivery wards, looking for undocumented women. What is that going to do? That's just going to prevent women from accessing the critical services that they need: maternity care, prenatal care, other reproductive health care services. So when we acknowledge how sexist oftentimes these policies are and what they're saying about our reproduction and the families that we have to really bring that gender lens to this debate. And when policies like that create a climate of fear, we need to change those policies.
Everything overlaps, all the policy areas overlap. Juan, as we've discussed a little bit, even with growing voter influence for the Latino community, so much of politics today seems to target Latino immigrants. And yet when laws targeting Latinos like Arizona's SB 1070 and the replicating states are challenged in court, the legal debate, as you and I have discussed, is about the structure of government, states' rights versus federal supremacy. Mm-hmm. But we know these are really about the Latino community. How do we address this purposeful discrimination in court or otherwise?
A lot of the debate is actually almost sterile. It's almost theoretical. We talk about federal government's role, state government's role, etc. One, we all know that these laws are being passed because of the type of immigrants that are coming into these new states and to the various issues that in municipalities. We know exactly what is going on. Occasionally we are able to use the courts to actually document these things. On a handful of occasions, we've been able to actually have the court find that the legislative record, for example, what happened in Alabama, that the legislative record actually supports the clear indication that Alabama passed a law specifically to target Latinos. I mean, to all of us in this audience, we know that. But to have a federal court judge actually say that is a milestone. We've seen this in other issues as well. I'll give you one more example. Arizona is amazing on various levels. One is, of course, is the first of the anti-immigrant state laws that was passed that's being attacked and challenged in court by MALDEF and others. But, most recently now, they're actually challenging as well the applicability of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act to Latinos and only to Latinos. Think about that. So first they go after the undocumented population in Arizona. Now they're going after the citizens. And we always make connections. All of our work on voting rights work and redistricting work is always tied. It is the clear hope, assumption, and the documented evidence that the more we elect individuals from Latino communities to become members of the elected legislatures, the likelihood is that this kind of rhetoric will eventually die down and hopefully go away. Now the issue is, in places like Arizona, the intent is there. In many ways, it is incumbent upon LatinoJustice, PRLDEF, MALDEF, and all of us who clearly see the targets of these laws to continue to speak to these issues. As plainly as they're being spoken about against us, we have to speak to and expose it. These are laws that are being passed, particularly because the Latino community is growing, particularly because the Latino community is being deemed as a threat, despite the fact that the Latino community has been here for what? Long before the European nations got here. It's an amazing juxtaposition, but we have to continue to beat that drum.
Absolutely. So, Mercedes, as Juan has, I think, elucidated, there's often by these policymakers an inability to distinguish immigrants from citizens and their families, and it's really targeting the Latino community. So many of the anti-immigrant, anti-Latino immigrant state laws and even federal proposals seem designed to restrict and deter Latinos, immigrant and non-immigrant alike, from accessing government services. With regard to HUD programs and services, in this time of heightened need, what are the concerns that you've seen with regard to Latino and Latino immigrant access, and how are those current concerns about access to these services being addressed?
Well, of course, there's always the issue of discrimination. You and I have litigated together in other lifetimes. And at HUD, certainly we take very seriously the issue of discrimination. You know that John Trasviña is the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing, takes it very seriously as a whole. A part of that has actually been a historic effort within HUD on new affirmatively furthering housing regulation that we're readying and that we've all worked on together. So it cuts across program. But I guess I'd like to talk more about the issue of access and how it is that we work together on these things. One of the programs that I'm particularly involved with is actually amending and putting out new tools for those that work on the consolidated plan, which is the planning document that governs about $4.5 billion worth of funding a year. One of the important elements to that is how it is that community participates. If you can't access computers, if you can't read the data, if you can't look at mapping, if you're constantly fighting with local government to take a look at the data so that you can respond, you're completely left out. And if there are language barriers, peor tantito. So what we're doing is in late April, we're actually releasing a completely new effort. We're giving mapping tools to the entire country. The entire consolidated planning process will now be online. There's a template, easy to work with, language sensitive, and it is meant actually to democratize the data. So it's the first time in our history of using block grants over 35 years that now this data is really accessible to the public. And we expect and will dedicate lots of money on training in multiple languages so that community for the first time stops having to fight just to get the data to fight, but get the data at the same time and be able to represent the needs of their community. It's a huge step forward. The consolidated plan hasn't been touched in essence in over 15 years. And this will be the first time that we use technology, better data, and cultural competency as foundation stones for the new change.
Well, as you've explained, I think particularly in this day and age, those resources, the CDBG funds, are critically important, in particular because one undeniable and significant impact of the recession has been in severely straining government resources at all levels, federal, state, local, and triggering a true disinvestment in many critical government services. Roberto, what has plainly not been immune from these government reductions, this disinvestment, is public education. How will this disinvestment in public education affect the Latino community?
I mean, in the long run, I think you've hit on what to me is one of the trends of greatest concern. You have these two conflicting events. On the one hand, the very large population of young Latinos, most of them citizens, moving into school age and beyond, really critical element of the American workforce going forward into the 21st century. We've all seen the numbers. We're all aware of it. People have been talking about this now for more than a decade, the arrival of the second generation and the importance of Latino youth, and the importance of remedying the educational disparities that have been in place now for a long time. You've got all these young people moving to public education at a critical time when they're needed by the country as a future workforce, at the very moment when, through this series of economic cycle effects and some deliberate policy decisions, you've had disinvestment from the very resources that will allow them to become productive citizens, parents, workers, contributors to our society. I mean, it's a really it's a troubling, self-destructive thing for the country to be doing. You leave aside the civil rights issues. Leave aside the social justice issues. Simply in terms of the nation's self-interest, and the self-interest of older white people, and the self-interest of baby boomers, and the self-interest of somebody who's never met a Latino. This is not a smart thing to do, to pull the rug out right at the moment when you have very substantial needs, and when you know that investment in education in this population of people will yield very substantial returns to the whole of society. And it's this kind of tragic train wreck that's happening in our society. And when you were talking about promoting change, that's really one of the keys. I mean, getting a social understanding of the need to invest in a younger generation is one of the core concepts of commonweal, of social good, of social welfare, the sense of it's how nations prosper when there's a sense of shared duty across generations. And because of the ethnic divide in generations in our society, because young people are more Latino, more Black, more Asian than the older generations that are not, we are in danger of disrupting that really key element of the social contract.
I think that that's a critical concern. This sense of common mission has been lost in too many of our endeavors. Jessica, despite the progress with the ACA that we talked about, this government disinvestment in government services has impacts on healthcare and on reproductive health issues. Talk a little bit about that and how you think the Latino community plays a role in either preserving, fighting for those services, or otherwise.
As I mentioned, Latinos are supportive of reproductive justice issues. In fact, we did a poll with Lake Research Partners that showed that Latinos agree that women should have access to personal private health decisions regarding their reproductive health care, including abortion, including contraception, without politicians interfering. And they also agree that despite church teachings that they should have access to and remain legal abortion care and other reproductive health services. What we're seeing in this country right now is a debate around these issues. And right now we're facing the debate around contraceptive access. It's just going to continue to grow. And what essentially the folks who are fighting with us are trying to do is dismantle the wins that we have achieved through healthcare reform, and dismantle the protections that we have for legal abortion care, and dismantle the access that we are gaining for contraception care. So our organization is working to ensure that the voices of the Latino community are lifted, and that they're hearing us loud and clear, and that we're part of the conversation, and that we're making a difference in terms of policy and advocacy to protect the wins that we've gained over the last year.
Now, Juan, let's talk about the Latino community with respect to another set of government services. The one set of government services, it does seem to be generally immune from spending reductions, and therefore the level of spending on criminal justice becomes even more stark in times like this. Talk a little bit about these criminal justice issues, how they affect the Latino community, and how the Latino community in turn influences them.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we are talking about, of all government services, there always seems to be always an extra dollar for punishment. And we do punishment very well in America. We like to lock people up, throw away the key, don't care what happens when they're inside, and when they come back out, allá ellos. Don't worry about it. And despite the fact that we're still the country with the largest and the highest imprisonment rate of any other country in the world, despite the fact that we are at historic highs in our prison populations, we have very little rational decision-making when it comes to criminal justice policies. We have seen laws in certain parts of our country that get passed from one moment to the next, literally, almost overnight, 2 weeks time period, because of a tragic event. Now, mind you, some tragic events have to be addressed. But you put a microphone in front of an elected official who wants to address a tragic event and enhance new sentences and new required mandatory sentences and new extra prison time because it's brand new evil, it gets passed that quick. With very little formulation or rational decision-making about what would be the consequences of those policies over the long term. And I think what's happening in the Latino community is that the pervasiveness, the depth of criminal justice policies are such that they are hard to ignore. They're just simply hard to ignore for our families and our neighborhoods. And where I always come at from the issue of criminal justice policies is to make sure that we have sane criminal justice, rational criminal justice policies that are tailored to individual issues and tailored to the kind of crimes that are there and not just a blanket across the board. At the same time, we spend very little time also putting a microscope on expenditures and the use of law enforcement. There are parts of America where you walk down the street and you will be harassed in a heartbeat because you're either black or brown. And sometimes you'll be harassed again and again in the same year. The stop and frisk numbers in New York City were just released last week. We're talking about 685,000 people getting stopped, questioned, and frisked in New York City alone. An increase of 14% from last year. An increase of 600% from the time Bloomberg took office. And where do you think those things happen? They don't happen in the Upper West Side, on the Upper East Side. They don't happen anywhere near where white folk live. They happen in our communities. And in many ways, a focus on how we, a rational decision and conversation about what is the return of investment every time we spend dollars on new prisons and prison expenditures. What is the return on investment when we allow police forces to do preemptive strikes? In many ways, the same kind of preemptive strike we did in Iraq. Preemptive strikes. Sure, there might be a connection between crime and preemptive strikes, but the cost is the complete lack of confidence of our young people in policing, the complete lack of confidence of our young people in criminal courts, and the complete lack of confidence in a fair system. And that will erode our Latino community's ability to have faith that we are going to be able to have a fair system and a fair shake.
Whether the issues public education or community development or healthcare or criminal justice, obviously a critical role for Latino community leaders and Latino community members to play in policy formation. We've talked a bit about different ways of policy involvement, but in this current political season, this presidential year, obviously there's a great concern about voter mobilization, voter participation, and the flip side, voter suppression. So Mercedes, you alluded to your rich prior life before you were the HUD official that you are today. Talk a little bit about how some of these issues that we've talked about the recession, particularly with respect to families and their homes and the like, how that affects voter participation, how it presents challenges in voter mobilization for the Latino community, so we know what we have to overcome, as it were.
Well, there's no question that when you're struggling to put food on the table and you're deciding between medicine or rent, shoes for your kids, literally at that level, that it suppresses participation in many, many things, right? You're just trying to get by. I guess what I would say to our community is that's what people are hoping, right? We've now heard all kinds of reasons why we should be concerned, upset, depressed as a national community. And that is certainly what some are hoping. That, you know, I once read a poem that said, you are most oppressed when you oppress yourself. And so if we allow these things to stop us from fighting for all of the things that we have gained over the years and that are at risk because of this recession, we are dooming our kids and our grandchildren to worse conditions. So I guess I would say this is not the time to sit down, right? This is the time to get up. This is the time to get registered. This is the time to demand your voice, right? Because it really is all about the future. This election will be about which America we choose, right? And it will be for us, for the Latino community, our place in it. So despite all the things, the economy is getting better. It's slow, but it's getting better. And I don't want to minimize anyone's pain. But I guess I would say, if you feel that stress, and we all do, it's time to make sure that you do everything possible, that you lift it off of the shoulders of your children. So it's time to get up.
Jessica, talk a little bit about what you all are doing to increase Latino civic involvement, particularly on the issues of reproductive justice, but more broadly in the face of these challenges that are before the community.
Latina Institute is engaging on a campaign called Soy Poderosa, and we connected that to some of our polling that showed that Latino voters are actually pro-choice, and in polling sometimes you see segments, and one of the segments that we looked at that was the pro-choice voter, Latino voter, we call them pro-choice poderosa. So off that idea, we engage in a campaign called Soy Poderosa, where we're broadening and expanding and energizing our base to ensure that they're active and engaged and are lifting up their voices and their stories and their experiences to policymakers, to members of the community, and to change makers, and that they themselves are change makers. So we're having a really exciting interactive campaign that we will engage folks in Texas, in Florida, in Wisconsin, in California, in Colorado, across the country, where we're having Latinas and Latinos share their experiences, share their voice in terms of their support of reproductive justice, support of healthcare access, support of immigrant women's rights, and that they demand to be heard, and that they will be heard in the next election. And for those that can't vote because they don't have status, they're not a U.S. citizen, that they still make a difference in their community, that they have members that vote for them in their families and in their communities, and that their voice matters and their experiences matter. So it's called Soy Poderosa, and we have a website called soypoderosa.org, and you can learn more about that. So thank you for allowing me to talk about this.
We've talked a little bit about, Mercedes mentioned some of the forces that hope our voters will be demoralized and demobilized. But there are actually positive steps, proactive steps, real steps being taken to suppress the vote by some in this country. So, Juan, what about the voter ID laws that seem to be spreading across the country? How will these laws affect the Latino community, the Latino voting community in 2012 and beyond?
There's a rash of laws that are going to make it harder and harder for individuals to exercise their right to vote in the absence of any real data that fraud is occurring at any kind of significant level. At the same time, many of the states that are considering these laws or have already passed these laws are the same states that may have voted for the Obama administration 4 years ago. So there has to be, we all see connections between voter suppression activity, voter suppression laws, and the way these states or the population of these states actually voted in the last election. I mean, the connections for me are pretty clear. I think the issue of voter identification for the purposes of either registered to vote or exercising your right to vote has to be understood in the context of access to identification generally. We shouldn't assume that just because most of us in this room probably have in our pockets some kind of photo identification means that the rest of the country does. We shouldn't assume that voting, which has been a bedrock principle of our democracy in this country, shouldn't be treated as anything less than a right, not a privilege to be earned, not a privilege to be re-earned, not some kind of test on how meritorious we are, but a right that comes with and is part and parcel of our citizenship. And in many ways, all these voter identification laws, every new wave, every new wrinkle in making it harder for people to actually exercise their right to vote, test that premise. It tests the premise that we actually are a country that considers that voting is some kind of privilege that has to be earned and re-earned and meritoriously earned and re-earned over time. And I think that's a mistake. In a country as important as this country has been for the development of democracy throughout the world history, we should be shamed that compared to other Western democracies, our voter participation rates are astronomically low. In a country that imports, I should say exports, democracy to other world jurisdictions, we should be ashamed that we allow states to do this thing. And in many ways, it harks back to what happened several years ago in the election. There is no national norm for national elections. There is no national norm about how to tabulate votes, how to count votes, how to register to vote in a country that allows 50 states to almost do whatever they want.
In the face of these negative steps, as we've discussed, it's really important to work on voter mobilization and voter motivation. Roberto, one of the implications of the demographic changes that you described earlier is that we have this constantly growing number of newly adult Latino U.S.-born youth who are potential voters in a sector, a demographic, age demographic, that often doesn't participate. What do you think it would take to motivate this growing number of adult Latino U.S.-born youth to be engaged and involved in voting and elections?
Boy, Tom, if I had the answer to that, I could fix all the problems we talked about here. Because if Latinos were not like other people in this regard, and if instead of waiting until they were 30 or so to start exercising the franchise, if Latino young people at 18 started voting at really effective rates, this whole conversation would be hugely different. And it would be, the politics of all this would be enormously different. It's more than 400,000 new eligible voters a year that just age into the electorate. They don't have to do anything. And no one has to do it. This is just nature. They're already there. They're born, they're here, they're citizens. And as time passes, there are more and more of them who are of voting age. Unfortunately, they behave very much like other Americans where age and socioeconomic characteristics, particularly income, are key indicators whether somebody votes or not. This is, I think it's a challenge for the political leadership, Latino and otherwise. Certainly in 2008, we saw an increase in youth voting, and it may be, people were speculating that potentially the trend to lower voting among young people has changed. It's something that goes back more than 20 years. If it changed across the board, we'd see really fundamental differences in this country because there's a stark generation gap in terms of political views on a whole series of issues. Many of the ones we've talked about here today, certainly reproductive rights, certainly immigration, climate change, the role of government. The biggest dividing line is by age in this country. So I've just made your question more important without answering it, unfortunately.
It's a very real challenge. The very real challenge with such a payoff if we solve the issue of mobilizing and getting involved Latino youth as voters. Panel, you've been very generous with your time. I'm going to ask you all one closing question. In 30 seconds or less, we're going to do a little foreshadowing. A year from now, when we're doing the next Latino State of the Union in 2013, what do you expect that we Latinos in the Latino community will be or ought to be concerned about 1 year from now? So that's the question. 30 seconds or less. Mercedes, you first.
I guess I would say that a year from now, President Obama will be in his second term. And it will be the time for the youth to really understand the future is theirs. And it's time to continue to mobilize and make good on all of the things that are possible.
Juan.
The issue of immigration reform has everything to do with the upcoming election. And if Mercedes is right, we're probably going to be at a point where we can have national immigration reform, and that will fix a lot of these issues having to do with profiling, discrimination, and the inability of our families to maintain their ties together. So I think that'll be the issue.
Here, here. Jessica.
In a year from now, we're going to start seeing more of the benefits of the healthcare reform bill. I think it's hard for people to grasp because it doesn't feel tangible yet. It's coming little by little. I think we'll see the benefits, but I think we'll still continue to see the tax on women, on immigrant women, and demonization of our community. So I, really want to continue to push forward and ensure that our voices are heard in terms of immigration policy, in terms of healthcare reform, in terms of women's rights.
And finally, Roberto, a year from now.
Oh, I'm going to end this on an optimistic note and say that in a year from now we're going to be concerned about how best to take advantage of a growing economy, how best to ensure that the Latino population benefits from increased employment and increased investment in our communities as we see the country bouncing back.
I like that optimistic note. Thank you, panelists. It's clear from our discussion today that while we have made tremendous progress, we must remain vigilant in our pursuit of real change for Latinos and for the entire nation. It's our hope that this forum has provided some of the critical tools we all need to leave this forum, seize upon the areas of consensus, create new areas of consensus, and help one another in service of our collective goal to improve life for all Latinos and all Americans in this country. Let's give a round of applause to our progress thus far and to an even better future. On behalf of MALDEF, let me thank our panelists and thank all of you again for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to seeing you next year at MALDEF's 6th Annual Latino State of the Union. Thank you.